Washington Journal continues.
On C-SPAN's Washington Journal, the Hitchens brothers are back, one on the right coast, one on the left coast. We'll start here on the right coast with Peter Hitchens. What do you make of all of this?
Well, apart from all the laughing I've been doing, I'm beginning to feel that I've come out here perhaps a little too soon. It doesn't seem to be developing as fast as everyone in London thought it would. I think over here you had Sam Donaldson saying it was going to be all over in a couple of days, and it hasn't been. It has, as all the Clinton problems did before when I was here, bogged down into lawyers. And once the lawyers get hold of it, I rather fear that it will disappear into itself for a long time and quite possibly run into the ground, which is a shame, because it looked as if the real problems of the Clinton presidency, although they're not about sex, were finally going to be encapsulated in one big piece of dishonesty and scandal.
This does feel a bit odd. You came, what, 4,000 miles from Great Britain to come here.
Yes. And
your brother left us to go to San Francisco, where he's living. Good morning, Mr. Christopher Hitchens, and what's your take on all this?
Good morning, Brian. It's filled me with a new respect for the American right. I'd up till now thought of them as rather an unpolished crew, the sort of people who tour the country calling for sexual abstinence among teenagers, for example. But now it seems that they can infiltrate a well-heeled liberal babe from Beverly Hills into the White House, get her in to see the president just as he's come from church with his daughter, get her in to see Vernon Jordan just the day before she signs an affidavit, and get him to get her in to see Revlon just the day after she's signed on the dotted line. This is genius and needs, I think, much more praise and attention than it's had so far.
It sounds like you don't believe Hillary Clinton.
I've never really believed in her or her, no. But what I am amazed by, I must say, is that I know this actually from bitter experience, including from an attack on my good self, my own person, on your book notes the other day when you were questioning the vulgar Dr. Daniel Pipes. That generally speaking, if someone asserts that they are the victims of a conspiracy, or even that they know about a conspiracy, they are accused of being conspiracy theorists, and by the mainstream, especially by the liberal mainstream, automatically counted out. And you're assumed, if you assert or allege that, to discredit yourself out of your own mouth. Usually people who make allegations of conspiracy say the White House is behind them, the conspiracies, I mean. This is the first time I know about that the White House has asserted that it is not the source but the actual target of a conspiracy. And I think that should have got more attention than it did as well. I see Mr. Babbitt today says that any suggestion that his own policies were timed for the benefit of potential funding donors to the Democratic Party is also a conspiracy theory. This is amazing.
Let me ask the two of you so that the audience understands why we invited the two of you here again, because we've had you here many times. But Christopher Hitchens, you're still a man of the left, right?
Sure thing.
And Peter Hitchens, you're a man of the right.
Very much so.
What do you want to say about what your brother just said?
Well, I think he hasn't gone far enough. I think we should praise these training camps that seem to exist in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, where bimbolinas are trained in the art of inserting themselves into the presidential life, and indeed where bankers are trained in arranging to have their banks collapse and checks to disappear. The length and extent of this conspiracy is absolutely fantastic. The reason, I think, why people like Hillary Clinton, who themselves come from a much more conspiratorial and tight left-wing background than is generally acknowledged. The reason why they go on in this way about conspiracy is because what they're saying is these people are not part of the conformist consensus which they're trying to create, which the liberal establishment in both the United States and Britain has been creating over the past 30 or 40 years. And by saying conspiracy, they're saying lunatic, they're saying mad, they're saying out of the mainstream and therefore not to be taken account of. It's an extraordinary piece of intolerance, and it's one of the most noticeable things about the new left-wing establishment, that it is utterly intolerant of anybody who stands up to it or criticizes it in any way. And I think Hillary Clinton encapsulates that beautifully.
Christopher Hitchens, your reaction to your brother?
No, that's all nonsense, I'm very sad to say. The fact is that the Clintons set out to move the Democratic Party to the right in their campaign for the nomination, and then the country to the right, and have succeeded in doing both things, and have made no bones about either. And that in the election campaign that brought Governor Clinton to office, it was only people on the left, such as myself, my colleague Alexander Coburn at The Nation, Ralph Nader, and other people associated often with the campaign of Jerry Brown, who brought up either the Clintons' sordid business practices in Arkansas, where they were sort of franchising a poor little state for its rich inhabitants and for themselves. Or the, what should we say, the bad habit of regarding women as part of the political spoils system, let's put it tactfully, where Jerry Brown challenged Clinton on both of these things a couple of times in public. The right at that point said practically nothing about Clinton. Certainly the official right said nothing about dirty fundraising practices. Why would it? I mean, Clinton's Whitewater connection is a savings and loan connection. The Republicans didn't want to bring that up.
Let's take comment from you.
Well, I would like to riposte to that the problem with people like Christopher, whose left-wing politics are really more of a faith than a political position, is that they can never, ever accept that any left-wing administration which is in power is left-wing. As soon as they're in power, they're immediately compromising with conservatism in some way, and therefore unacceptable, and can't be praised or endorsed. So Christopher and people like him will always only ever allow the truly left-wing to be people who are out of power or who've been ejected from power. This is the old Trotskyist view of which I used to be part, in that the Soviet Union wasn't actually a left-wing state, for instance. It was some kind of deformed capitalism. It couldn't be left-wing because the left was in power, and when the left is in power, it behaves very badly.
We need to take some calls. Christopher Hitchens, how much older are you than your brother Peter?
I'm never sure. A couple of years, I think.
And your age at this point?
By the way, talking of dates, may I mention something?
Yeah.
The grandfather and grandmother of my daughter, my in-laws, Edwin and Gertrude Blue, of this neighborhood, today become genuine 49ers. It's their 49th wedding anniversary, so I hoped I could be allowed a sentimental moment for any of their friends who are watching.
Well, let me check the age. Thank you. Well, how old are you now, Mr. Christopher Hitchens?
I'll be 49 in April.
Peter Hitchens?
Oh, heck, I'm 46.
And Cleveland, Tennessee, thanks for waiting on the Democratic line. Go ahead, please.
Yes, mine is more of a comment. I work in a nursing home, and most of the residents there are 80-plus years old, except for some of the newer ones coming in. They're younger because of drunk driving accidents. And my comment is about the tobacco lawsuits and so forth. If you ask any of these older residents at this nursing home how they feel about smoking and the causes and the things that happen after smoking, they will tell you the same thing that most everyone else knows. And I'm wondering how in the world can you go back and sue these tobacco companies? I smoke myself, and what it boils down to is responsibility for your actions. If you smoke, you have a chance of lung cancer. If you drink, you have a chance of cirrhosis of the liver. That would be like you going back and trying to have a lawsuit with McDonald's for the clogged arteries and your heart attacks. Then we want to know why the youth won't accept the responsibilities for their actions.
Thanks. And Mr. Christopher Hitchens, woman right after your heart.
Well, yes, I'm having a terrible battle at the moment trying to rid myself of the habit, but
Which habit?
Sorry, the one she's talking about. There are some others that might or might not yield to treatment as well.
Smoking you're talking about.
Smoking.
Not drinking.
Well, you want to drink less when you're not smoking, which is one of the many disadvantages about trying to give it up. I, in common, of course, with everybody else who's ever taken it up, did not take it up under the assumption that it would be good for me. I don't think it's ever been taken up by anyone who thinks that, though it has been advertised as good for you. I remember Ronald Reagan used to advertise cigarettes that way, and it was I think it was Chesterfield that was the one that most doctors recommended, something really hilarious, but you know, one didn't believe that any more than any other kind of advertising.
We're going to take a call from Little Chute, Wisconsin, and come back to Peter Hitchens. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Everything just seems to be so much of a coincidence with the president, with the Revlon thing about how Monica Lewinsky was going to get a job at Revlon. Christopher hit it right on the nose. It just seems like he's trying to cover it up, and I think it's ridiculous.
Indianapolis. I'm sorry. Peter Hitchens first, and then Indianapolis.
Well, there is a chain of circumstance here which just needs one small fact to forge it into a very sharp blade of condemnation for the president. It's obviously not coincidental, but the trouble with it is that, as with so many of these things, the president has appears to have picked a young lady who, after she starts complaining or telling any kind of truths about their relationship, can immediately be slandered and have her personal reputation destroyed. This seems to be the kind of woman the president picks. And so, despite all these non-coincidental coincidences and this damning chain of facts, I'm not at all sure that it's ever actually going to come to anything.
Indianapolis now. Go ahead, please.
Well,
hold on,
hello.
Christopher. Go ahead.
This is Ivan in Indianapolis. First time I've ever watched the show, and I simply want to say What these two men are saying, these Brits on the left and on the right, should cause all of us to be Anglophiles once again. God save the Queen. They've taken a very objective look at this.
Well, you certainly know how to hurt a guy.
I beg pardon?
You certainly know how to hurt a guy.
I wondered if I could get their take on one aspect of what Miss Lewinsky has allegedly done, and a point of view that might address her credibility or not. Would that be all right?
Go ahead.
I know that she's a Democrat. I would presume that she's a liberal. As such, I would presume that she's sensitive to the women's movement. Yet it appears to me that the nature of the alleged acts that she was involved in with the president seemed to be the type of act that would be more demeaning toward women for all the reasons that everyone can guess. Why do they think, being from the United Kingdom, that the women's movement hasn't been more critical of what has taken place here vis-a-vis the president and the particular nature of the relationship that they had?
Mr. C. Hitchens.
Just to clear the ground a bit for what I'm going to want to say, and to disagree with Peter once more, I do think there's a chance of this achieving critical mass because two long-stalled and long-delayed and rather confusing inquiries, the so-called Whitewater one into Clinton's business habits and practices, and the so-called Paula Jones one into his allegedly viewing women as part of the spoil, have been stalled in parallel for a long time. They've both been kept at arm's length by different teams of lawyers and different tactics. With this case, the wires have crossed and touched, and there's quite a crackle, because with the attempt to find a private sector job, after many public sector taxpayer ones, by the way, for Miss Lewinsky, but a Revlon job, Vernon Jordan has visited the same well that he is supposed to have visited when it came time to find some comfort money for a soft landing for Webster Hubbell, when, as Clinton's choice for Deputy Attorney General, it came time for him to go to jail, to the big house. So that's why Kenneth Starr is interested and has to be interested in it, and it's why the apparently sex life aspects of the inquiry are germane, because they seem to support a claim of a modus operandi. So that's the first point. As to the complete silence for a long time of official American feminism about Bill and Hillary, I've often found, and sometimes said on this show, that it's both shameful and astonishing. It's come down to them saying, really, there's nothing they won't let him do as long as he holds his current rather wobbly, hypocritical line on abortion. And that, I think, is a pretty sordid political pact.
Can we get your brother in here, Peter Hitchens?
Well, I was going to make this point about abortion, which seems to me almost always to be the central issue in American politics now. It's one of the reasons why Clinton has done most of the things that he's done, is because of the loss of working class religious support for the Democratic Party, because of its support for abortion and his attempts to get that support back with the Irish American vote, the Polish American vote. These things are at the heart of much that he does. And I think that the National Organization of Women, which yesterday apparently decided that to ask the president to sign a pledge to reject sexually intimate relations with employees and volunteers, they then apparently considered having the group's interns march to the White House brandishing copies of the pledge. Well, this was rejected because it would suggest that the National Organization of Women were taking a side attacking Clinton as opposed to making a general statement. Well, wow. I don't think you could have got that kind of impartiality and restraint if Clarence Thomas were involved.
Mount Vernon, Illinois, you're next for the Hitchens.
Yes, Brian, I appreciate your show, and I think you're the greatest.
Welcome.
I'm asking either guest, what do they think of the Kenneth Starr investigation? Do they think he's overstepped his boundaries? And what do the common folk in London think about all of this?
Christopher Hitchens?
Well, as I just said, I mean, he'd be wrong if he didn't investigate this, because it seems to have a crossover or allegorical connection, if you like, at the least, with his Whitewater inquiry. I mean, for example, I say this because I think a lot of people are getting it wrong. If Mr. Starr was going to talk to Miss Sheila, I'm just forgetting her name.
Sheila Lawrence?
Yeah, Sheila Lawrence, the widow of the late denizen of Arlington Cemetery, for example, of whom it has been alleged that she's enjoyed sexual relations with the president and so on. If Mr. Starr went and started asking about that, he'd be way, way out of the boundary or the remit, the mandate, the warrant of his inquiry. He isn't empowered to ask who the president's been sleeping with. He is empowered rather to ask whether or not there is corruption, to give it an old-fashioned term, whether this is covered up by forms of jobbery that have been used to delay justice in other inquiries. So since the only reply to this point that I've heard is, well, Ken Starr is right-wing, so you can forget everything he says, which I think is an intensely bad faith reply. I must cling to the view there must be something to my point if the only riposte is so weak. By the way, he may be very right-wing for all I know. He certainly doesn't seem very left-wing, but he can't be as right-wing or as creepy as Dick Morris, who was the president's best friend for a long time until his own sordid private life allowed us a window into an enormous tranche of a dirty public life and the corruption, really organized corruption, of a whole cycle of democratic electoral politics.
Christopher Hitchens, why did you move to San Francisco?
I'm teaching at Berkeley this semester. I'm teaching at the Graduate School of Journalism out here.
Peter Hitchens, what's it look like over in Great Britain, this whole story? And when did you come here?
I came out on Tuesday, and I think what it looks like is something very familiar to us in one way and very unfamiliar in another. It's familiar in that we've had an awful lot of ministers falling over the past 5 years because of their sexual lives becoming public.
Your cabinet officers?
Yes, but it's also unfamiliar because I think most British people don't really understand the office of president. They confuse it with the prime minister and a politician, and they don't realize that Americans can simultaneously despise Bill Clinton but hold a strong respect for the office of president, which makes them hold back from the sort of calls for instant resignation and dismissal, which would certainly fall on the head of a British cabinet minister who behaved like this. We have a parallel sex scandal running with our Foreign Secretary, our Secretary of State, Robin Cook, at the moment, who is in fairly deep trouble, but holding on for the moment. And people are trying to make parallels between the two. But I think you have an elected king here, and what we need to understand more in England is that the respect which Americans have for the office, and that, I think, is another of the things which may well save Mr. Clinton from a fate which he would undoubtedly have suffered in England.
Boston, go ahead.
Yes, good morning, Brian.
Hi.
Good morning, Brothers Hitchens.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, actually, Mr. Hitchens, you just brought up the question that I had, which was a little bit different from those others that have come in this morning, and that was that Britain has had a history of salacious sex scandals going back to perfume, and I was wondering from both of you how you would compare the reaction in this country to the reactions to the various sex scandals that have occurred there.
I think we're becoming more alike, I'm afraid. I think the obsession with sex as being at the heart of life, an obsession which is fostered by Hollywood and by television, has entered both our societies, and it's not just affecting our judgment of the way in which politicians behave, but I think actually also affecting the behavior of politicians. What's extraordinary about this country, we tend to think that we sent you guys over here to set up a Puritan nation, is that in such a short period of time, it's now possible to discuss oral sex on primetime television.
Peter Hitchens is a columnist for the Daily Express of London. Christopher Hitchens, your reaction?
Well, in the Profumo case, if there had just been a minister who was having an affair with a woman, not his wife, I don't think anyone thinks there would have been a scandal that we'd all still remember by name. The fact of the matter, and I think it supports my general rule that most sex scandals are only partly and seldom more than slightly sexual. What Profumo did was lied to the House of Commons, having lied to his cabinet colleagues, about his relationship with a woman who was simultaneously having an affair with a Soviet intelligence official based in the Soviet embassy in London, a certain Colonel or Captain Ivanov, while he, Profumo, was defense minister. Now, that's a scandal by any definition. Most other sex scandals I can think of have had a political dimension to them. Certainly, for example, nobody would have been interested in the possibility that Clarence Thomas was talking dirty if he'd had a different attitude to abortion, to a whole number of judicial questions. But I differ with Peter in thinking that it's not only impossible to expect that people will cease to find sex fascinating, or, as you rather oddly put it, a central part of life. Who can quarrel with that? I not only think that's inevitable, I think it's desirable. I actually think also the coverage of the sex lives of the great is a perfectly legitimate source of inquiry.
The point about central part of life is that sex has become important for itself. This is the first society in which sterility sterile sex has become the pagan religion. Paganism at least always had one thing in its favor, that it was in favor of fertility, but now it dances around the abortion clinic rather than around the phallic symbol.
Los Angeles,
You
welcome
have to remember it's 3 hours earlier for me than for you.
Los Angeles, welcome to the Morning Journal. Go ahead, please.
8, really.
Los Angeles, you're on the air. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hi. I have 3 brief, very closely related observations from a libertarian perspective. Number 1, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Number 2, unlike today's generation of politicians, America's founders had integrity, meaning they meant what they said and they said what they meant, and they meant no law abridging the freedom of speech. Finally, number 3, unfortunately, the vast majority of Democratic and Republican politicians have very little regard for the First Amendment, as evidenced by the so-called Communication Decency Act of 1995, where overwhelming majorities of them voted for this patently unconstitutional piece of crap. So I would say that the very first official act of the Republican politicians, the oath of office where they swear to defend the Constitution, is a lie based on results. May I have your comment, please?
Christopher Hitchens.
It is amusing that this president in particular should be a V-chip president, talking solemnly about the need to have an already fairly infantile mass media made more childish still, in fact, childish standards of protection being applied to it, and that he should tour the country with his wife, calling for abstinence as the main method of contraception. Not quite sure how that goes to Peter's point about paganism and sterility, from which I'm still slightly reeling, but which is actually potentially a very good point, I think, that it's the same president who cut 1.5 million or so poor women off the welfare rolls because on examination their lives didn't bear much moral scrutiny. They weren't being continent enough. Yes, there is this paradox between extreme Puritanism and censoriousness, which of course means that the First Amendment is not viewed with the reverence that it deserves.
Okauchee, Wisconsin. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Brian.
Hi.
I'm not too good at this, so bear with me. I think this kind of debunks the liberal media myth. I haven't heard much from their point of view on all this with Mr. Clinton, the President Clinton, and I just look at it as who have they put down since they've been in office? And one would be the insurance industry, tobacco industry, and also the Pentagon.
Thanks. Does this debunk the liberal media myth, Peter Hitchens?
Well, which liberal media myth? I think that one of the things which is quite astonishing in all this is that the liberal media, as I would classify them, who for most of the time that I was here between 93 and 95, held back from making any serious criticism of the president or investigating what he was up to, finally have, in a dam burst, discovered that there is a story here and have joined the right-wing conspiracy in the most extraordinarily enthusiastic fashion. If that's the myth he's talking about, yes, otherwise I don't know. Could I just go back to the point that the other caller made about the First Amendment? The whole point about the First Amendment is, who can believe that the Founding Fathers, if I understand your question correctly, were setting up that amendment to liberate pornography across the United States, which they were setting up? What the Founding Fathers believed was that a free country would be inhabited by moral men who would not seek to distribute such things. If immoral men seek to exploit freedom, it becomes license, and as everybody knows, once it becomes license, there are then calls for dictatorship and the end of freedom. Abuse freedom long enough and you cease to have it. It's a simple point. It can't be made often enough, and it should certainly be made to pornographers.
In this month's, I guess, let me just check it out here, February edition, actually, of Vanity Fair, Christopher Hitchens, you're the subject of a page on the letters page, Angels and Insects, and there's a cartoon there with you and Diana, Princess Diana, pulling you one way and Mother Teresa the other. And then one of the letters from Christopher Vaughn of Indianapolis, Indiana says, I guess it's safe to say that in Mr. Hitchens' world, no good deed goes uncriticized. I wasn't sure if his remark about, quote, a simpering Bambi narcissist and a thieving fanatical Albanian dwarf, unquote, was an attempt at highbrow sarcasm or just plain acerbic chatter from a self-important media bottom feeder. When they're talking about you, sir, what do you think of that?
I think it was a bit of both, it was an attempt also to try and encapsulate I think you and I did a show on it at one point with a gentleman from the Washington Times, trying to get people to remember what they've been trying to forget, which is what it was like, excuse me, Brian, living through a week of such absolute cretinism in the mass media, where, in what I thought was a very sinister way, not only were people told incessantly that others were grieving about the death of a rather mediocre princess, but that would have been bad enough to have that wall-to-wall from dawn till dusk, but they were told that they were themselves grieving, that we were all in the grieving process, which is no part of the mass media's job to do, even if it was true, which it was not.
Biloxi, Mississippi, for the Hitchens brothers. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Morning.
I love your show. Absolutely love your show.
Welcome.
What I was calling about, and I don't think people are saying it enough, is that it's not the act so much. It's just the lying, you know, that just continues. One lie leads to another. When they had the 60-minute show, the Stand By Your Man show on 60 Minutes, if they had taken that one step farther and told the American people what type of relationship they have a platonic relationship, they have a political relationship, then just think we wouldn't be having all of this now. And there's so many people in our own families that we know that that couples have stayed together for one reason or another. Maybe it's for the children, maybe it's financially, and then you know, if he must resort to this activity, then do it discreetly. But then at least they announced in the beginning that what type relationship they had.
Thanks. Peter Hitchens?
Yes, this is a reckless and trivial man who you have as President of the United States, and I think that that's the point about the lying. Lying, oddly enough, I think can be justified in politics.
Reckless and trivial.
I think so, and this is what's always struck me about him, and I think this episode, the importance of this episode, to me, is that it brings home just how reckless and trivial he is.
Christopher Hitchens, would you use those words, reckless and trivial?
I certainly wouldn't disown them. I mean, I think he's a very superficial, very shallow, opportunist guy. And yes, given that after one's looked at the timeline on this, there's no possibility that he can be telling the truth about this relationship. I mean, with all the negotiations he had with her in December are not the negotiations that someone who'd be untroubled by the allegation would make. And we also know that whatever the truth of these matters ever may be, that Mr. Clinton is a liar. And we know that because of Jennifer Flowers. I'm surprised there isn't more reaction from those who agreed to be gulled, if we put it like that, 6 years ago, to his quite, well, I would say quite casual, relatively casual admission 6 years later. Yeah, actually, I needed to get elected then, so I didn't tell the truth.
Well, now, that was what they did agree to do, and there was an agreement. There was an agreement among all these people to give President Clinton a lot of slack because they liked him, because he was their generation, because he behaved like them, and I think that still applies. They knew he was lying then. That's why they're not surprised or outraged by the admission that the Jennifer Flowers thing was a lie.
That was certainly true of the press corps in New Hampshire, where I was at the time. They just decided the line of the day is, this story's over, we're taking Bill and Hillary's view on Jennifer Flowers. That's certainly true. But the question really is, do politicians act in a hypocritical manner about sex for its own sake, so to speak, or do they do it because they believe that the public expects them to be hypocritical, or is it the public hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of the public, that dictates the rest of it? I actually think all three could possibly be true. In other words, had Clinton said on that 60 Minutes, look, when Miss Flowers says that I loved her and she loved me, that's all true. It's not true anymore. But it was true, all right. I think everyone, but it's nobody's business but mine. I think there would have been a gigantic breakthrough.
Let's go to Dennis.
Set a new standard, but of course, for all kinds of reasons, including his own relatively easy resort to lying, that wasn't possible.
Let's go to Dennis in Texas for Christopher and Peter Hitchens. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'd like to be able to change the subject here. And first and foremost, Christopher, you're the greatest. I just think you're absolutely the best thing that ever hit the United States in the way of reporters, whatever.
Very decent of you.
What I wanted to talk about was, see, I'm a headhunter, and right now I'm busy with people that are wanting to get out of the service. I mean, I'm being bombarded by pilots, senior mechanics, this type of thing that I'm really concerned about, because they are really wanting out, and there's jobs available for them. So they're like leaving en masse. And with the thing with Saddam, I'm not sure that we could handle it, you know? Thank you very much.
Peter and Christopher. Start with Peter.
I think this again draws attention to the fact that this is a very bad president of the United States. One of the most infuriating things in Britain when the scandal first re-broke last week was so many people saying, well, yes, this is very embarrassing, but he has been such a good president. And I kept saying, well, why? What is it that he's done? The United States is weaker in world terms. Its behavior in geopolitical issues has been often foolish. I think its policy towards the Middle East at the moment is quite extraordinarily foolish in practically saying to Israel, look, it's all your fault that there's trouble. Therefore, if you carry on shrinking until you eventually shrink into the sea, we will have peace in the Middle East. I think it's an amazingly foolish policy.
Tony Blair in town right now?
No, he's coming on Wednesday. And apparently the White House press corps have been instructed not to use his visit as an occasion to ask questions about Monica Lewinsky.
Norcross, Georgia. Hold on, Christopher Hitchens. Norcross, you're next.
Yes, good morning, Brian. This is Norman Wishman. I haven't spoken to you for a long time.
Welcome.
I did send you this email, but apparently you didn't get it. But I have an article in front of me, and this is particularly for Chris Hutchinson, that Jordan has ties to Lewinsky's mother, and I'll just read part of it. Vernon Jordan has another connection to Monica Lewinsky besides his old friend, President Clinton. He is a longtime friend of R. Peter Strauss, a wealthy New York media executive who was engaged to Lewinsky's mother, Marsha Lewis. Now, if the guy... that's probably why he helped her get a job. I just wanted to stress it because they said that even this Strauss, who's 74, who owns radio stations and small newspapers in New York's Hudson Valley, when his wife died of cancer, Jordan even spoke at the funeral. So now he's friends with Lewinsky's fiance, who she's going to get married. So why wouldn't he help anybody?
So you say it has absolutely nothing to do with anything?
Of course not.
It just so happened that he didn't help her until after the president had met Miss Lewinsky on December 28th, that's all.
Am I finished?
No. Did you want to answer, Mr. Peter Hitchens?
I wanted to say this. This was in USA Today 2 days ago. Nobody has talked about it. The headline is, Jordan has ties to Lewinsky's mother. Now, nobody's always talking about, all you hear about is, boy, isn't it something that he tried to help? Why did he all of a sudden try to help Monica get a job? Well, here it is. I'm looking at it right in front of me. Mm-hmm. If Chris Hutchinson was friendly with another person, and that daughter needed help, you mean that nobody would try to help her get a job, particularly if you're friendly with the guy who's going to marry her mother?
Christopher Hitchens.
I see what you mean. I mean, I knew that's interesting, and I'll look up the clip. I knew already that she became an intern in the first place because she had that connection with someone who was a very heavy-hitting donor to the Democratic coffers, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong in that. I mean, actually, she could have probably got to the Lincoln bedroom under her own steam if the donation had been big enough. Obviously, I don't want life to be so cold and bureaucratic that you can't ever help out the rich daughter of a rich friend who's also a rich donor. That would be sad. But it seems, and I think I heard Peter try to interject the same point, and it became very clear yesterday when one read the timeline properly, that it was only the day after she'd signed the requisite affidavit on the dotted line that Mr. Jordan went to Revlon for her.
By the way, I want to ask you both quickly. Here is the New Republic, a magazine owned by Marty Peretz, longtime friend of Albert Gore. Cover has a picture of the president, and above it, the politics of betrayal. What do you think it means?
I think it means that they designed that cover a couple of days ago, and they probably wish they hadn't now.
Why? Well,
I think that there was this panic. There was a panic in the Democratic Party that Mr. Clinton was going to drag them down, and that they had to get rid of him quickly. That moment, I think, is now past. And
what do you think?
They will now row back from it.
Christopher Hitchens, what do you think?
I know that the people in the Gore camp have for a long time regarded Clinton with contempt, and that in the recent past, before this business, when it was Mr. Gore who took most of the hits for Mr. Clinton's fundraising practices, that that contempt has turned to something much more like an active dislike. I think their restraint during all this period has been extraordinary. I mean, not even to their house organ, the New Republic, have they leaked anything that suggests that they're anything but doggedly loyal to a man whose loyalty, well, I was about to say they don't deserve, you know what I mean, who has done nothing to deserve their loyalty.
The vital thing about loyalty is to know exactly when to transform it into treason, and timing is all, and obviously this wasn't the moment.
Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, for Peter and Christopher Hitchens on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian, and good morning, Hitchens brothers. Greetings from Jesse Helms country. It's always a pleasure to see the Hitchens brothers up there. Their demeanor is so different than the normal run-of-the-mill American, real high IQ, the whole bit. You know, when they finally nailed Slick Willie, I just wonder that they took the Unabomber, made him have a psychiatric profile to see if he was playing with the full deck. I think when they run the psychiatric profile on Brother Bill, the country will be aghast.
Peter Hitchens.
You may well be right, but I don't know whether it's going to come to that. I think we're a long way short of psychiatric profiles, and I think the people who are beginning to refer to this this president as the OJ president are closer to the likely result. This will be a man who lives on in the Oval Office with fewer and fewer people willing to play golf with him.
Christopher Hitchens.
Well, that's why I said earlier that I think that sex and politics are a fit subject, a subject that a journalist doesn't have to apologize for being fascinated by. Here's the guy who could have said to himself, relatively recently, all those things people like to say, first Democrat re-elected since FDR, this and that and the other thing, youngest president since I can't remember who, all of that stuff, and all this is swirling around his head, and if what I suspect, well, in fact I'm sure of, is true, there must have been a moment when he thought, well, I could throw all that away for what is immediately in front of me for the next 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, it could happen that I'd have to forsake all that for this, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm willing to risk it. That is absolutely fascinating. It's the original definition of classical hubris. I think it should get a more informed and maybe more compassionate speculation than it's been getting.
Christopher Hitchens, it's 18 minutes before 7 a.m. where you are in San Francisco. By the way, where are you in San Francisco?
I'm just down near the Embarcadero on Battery.
And you're teaching across the pond there over at Berkeley?
Across the bay in Berkeley, yes.
What are you teaching?
Well, I'm at the Graduate School of Journalism, and I'm teaching a course trying to show that there is a tradition in America of journalism as literature, which Thomas Paine, Frederick Douglass, Mark Twain, H.L. Mencken, that journalism can aspire to be and can be literature, and that also that's the great tradition of American dissent as well. So it's an attempt to instill taste, bearing, and courage and moxie into the rising generation.
Are you coming back here eventually?
Oh, sure. I mean, I must say, but I don't mean to seem ungrateful for the hospitality I'm getting in Berkeley or in Stanford, but sometimes last week I did wish I hadn't left Washington.
Munster, Indiana, near Chicago. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi.
I do hope you got those photographs Judge scanned to you. What really bothers me more than anything is the timing that this story was broken just before the president gave his speech. And you can't tell me that isn't ugly when they said that they were sitting on this story. And I suppose that's why I'm so angry with the press.
Isn't it rather more grotesque that the president had to give the State of the Union speech after these things had been revealed? Isn't the true grotesqueness that you have somebody as president of your country about whom these things are known, are true, that the timing of the revelations is meaningless morally?
Munster, Indiana, you want to respond?
A year ago, though, that they knew the story. This story would have been ugly no matter when it broke. It was the timing. They knew this would be an ideal time to do it.
Who's they?
The gentleman that broke the story.
Well, no.
First of all, the Time magazine sat on the story. They bragged about it, stating that they knew it for a year. And that's what really bothers me.
Well, do you mean you'd rather have had it come out in time for last year's State of the Union speech?
The State of the Union speech was, in my opinion, truly marred by this, and you know it was.
Thanks.
Well, I do know it was, but I don't accept responsibility for the marring, as I'm sure no other reporter does. I mean, look, can I try and put it this way for you? You described the Newsweek, actually, not Time, as sitting on the story, well, and perhaps having wind of it for at least a year. Well, if they hadn't sat on it, as you put it, it would have come out in time to spoil last year's State of the Union speech for you. The fact is, the timing of this is very, very little in the control of the press. What I think you would have said in that case was that they had released the story before they really checked it, before they were sure it was true. And it must be said for most of the press that they've been, if anything, far too restrained in covering this kind of thing.
And more appropriate.
Michael Isikoff, the reporter in question, in effect gave up his job at the Washington Post after a dispute because they wouldn't run anything about the Paula Jones allegations. He took himself off to Newsweek. Newsweek very nearly denied him his great scoop, but because it was, for various reasons, afraid of being accused of being irresponsible. Really, madam, if anything, the press has been only too willing to spare the president embarrassment, and such embarrassment as has fallen on him is entirely self-inflicted, as I know you know, and I could tell from your voice.
Peter Hitchens.
Well, the essential truth of this story was known long ago, and I think if you're talking about timing and inappropriate timing, the real sadness is that this discussion was not had before the last presidential election, in time for the American people to pick somebody more fitted for the job of President of the United States.
That reminds me of our Book Notes guest on Sunday night. This book is brand new. It has just not even in the stores yet, and we'll have the first interview with Roger Simon coming up. We taped it yesterday, and the name of the book is Showtime. It's all about the 1996 election, about Bob Dole, Ross Perot, Bill Clinton, and they call this Showtime, the American political circus in the race for the White House. Newburgh, Indiana. Good morning.
Good morning. I would like to know why, if these two men know as much as they act like they know or think in their own minds they know about the American political system, why aren't you telling what all of this is all about? This all stems from the Thomas Hill hearings. And the right wing at that time, including Jerry Falwell, who did the Clinton Chronicles, Terrell, the guy who came in the American Spectator, et cetera, et cetera.
Are you saying it came because of the Thomas hearings?
Yes, it came because of the sexual abuse law, sexual harassment. They said they were going to get rid of that law, and they were going to take anybody down with it they could.
What would you? Let me ask you this: what would you think if what they're saying about the president turns out to be true?
I don't care if that's what you mean. It's not going to be true.
Okay, but go back to the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill thing. Did you care about that?
I cared about the law that was there. I cared that Hill was, like, forced to testify. She didn't do it voluntarily. You know.
Did you care about the issue of the relationship between Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas?
Not really. But what I do care about is someone like Paula Jones using a tool that working women in this country need badly, which is the sexual harassment law, and turning it into something trivial because she was propositioned. Harassment does not come from a one-time deal where you can say no and it's over.
Well, that's just saying that sexual harassment claims can only be lodged against Republicans. It's ridiculous.
I didn't say.
Well, that's the implication of this. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. What's been happening in this country for years is that whenever any Republican has risen to power or attempted to get confirmation for the Supreme Court, if there's been the slightest opportunity to pursue them with a special prosecutor or to nail them with sexual harassment, that's been done. And all the Democrats have said, fine. As soon as the thing is used against a Democratic president, everybody cries unfair, says, look at this prosecutor, look at this right-wing conspiracy. You can't have it both ways if you're going to pursue people in this fashion, and this was opened up.
Newburgh, Indiana,
you've got to have it back.
Your response?
This law was not even on the books then, sweetie. You know, get a grip.
Well, it's not a matter of whether the law was on the books. I'm talking about the method being used here. It's if you don't like the way the democratic process is going for your guy, then you can use these things against your enemies. But if your enemies then use them against you, they're unfair. That's a ridiculous way to proceed. If you forge a weapon for use in the political battle, don't be surprised if it gets turned against you.
Christopher Hitchens.
I don't know, madam, if it struck you as it has me. In this way, but do you notice Mr. Gingrich trying to bring the president down? Do you sense a desire among the right-wingers in the House and Senate to get
She's
rid
not
of this
line.
president. I certainly don't. What has struck me very much for the last 4 years, since Mr. Gingrich became Speaker, is the extraordinary level of collusion between him and the president, the extraordinary level of interest they have in common. It seems to me there's absolutely no right-wing serious attempt to get rid of Clinton, and every reason for them to hope that he serves out his full term. So that's to put what you say in general context. I'm more sympathetic to what you said earlier. I mean, if the worst that can be said of Clarence Thomas is true, then he talked in a coarse manner to one of his subordinates. It is not alleged of him that he propositioned anybody at any time. But I don't agree with Peter, on the other hand, that there's a partisan element to it. To the contrary, the main insurer and guarantee and prop and stay of political corruption in this country is, in fact, the bipartisan consensus, where the basic fundraising, hand-washing fat cats agree really not to over-investigate one another.
I've been trying to
We've just had a fantastic demonstration of that.
Hold on just a second. Palmdale, California. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Brian?
Yes, sir.
I don't think you really can appreciate how we appreciate C-SPAN, and in particular you out here in the real world, in Palmdale, California.
Thanks.
And also the Hitchens brothers, who I really admire as columnists or in the way they handle themselves. My comment is, all this being a Republican, all this garbage is just garbage. The important thing is the man possibly lied and deceived people in his statements. That's all I'm interested in, is did he or did he not lie? And I lived in Arkansas for some time, and that's his M.O., his modus operandi. He just can't tell the truth. And the women of this country have fallen for his rhetoric and his appearance. The picture that was on the New Reporter, I think it was, is his whole way that he used to do it to his mother and all his friends and everything when he was trying to get out of trouble, like a little boy pouting, and I'm about to cry if I don't get my way. That's about all I can, have to comment on, is just that, hey, the women love him, so we're stuck with him.
I'd only say about that men of power do lie, and sometimes they do have illicit sexual relations, and I think we would do well not to be too concerned about that, provided that these things are done in a certain way. What's objectionable about Mr. Clinton is, as I say, the trivial nature of everything that he does. He doesn't lie for any kind of high purpose, and his sexual relations seem to be, how should we say, fast food in their manner. What I've always found objectionable about him, and what's particularly bothering me at the moment because of Ireland, which is a huge issue back in England, is that he has adopted policies purely because they have suited his polls and because they have suited his fundraising activities. There's been no other reason, and we now have a terrible crisis in Ireland. The licensing of terrorist spokesmen in talks with democratic politicians, leading, in my view, to much greater violence and the danger of civil war in Ireland because of Mr. Clinton's utterly cynical and light-minded intervention. This is the kind of man he is, and all this episode does is underlines his triviality, his inability to take anything seriously or see anything seriously or understand the great issues of the globe.
Here is a picture from yesterday's, or actually today's, Daily News, and it's a picture of William Ginsburg and Monica Lewinsky, taken by John Roca of the New York Daily News, coming out of the Cosmos Club. Want a quick comment, Mr. Christopher Hitchens from the West Coast?
Not on that, but on Ireland, if I may. I think all that's wrong. I mean, the United States is, rather than the United Kingdom, the country that has for a long time had the primary responsibility for Irish affairs. No president Democratic or Republican or of Irish background or any other background can afford to ignore that fact. I don't think it did Mr. Clinton much good politically. I don't think that was the motive. I think there are aspects of the policy, such as some of the political rewards and offices given to members of the Kennedy family now that do fit more with the Clinton modus operandi. But as a matter of fact, the British government would still be pretending that there was no such thing really as Sinn Féin and no need to negotiate with the Republican movement if it wasn't for American pressure. And it's a very good thing, in my opinion. A great favor was done to the British government by the American insistence that that the Irish government has a right to be consulted about the North of Ireland, and that also the Republican movement in the North of Ireland is, as well as a military movement, a political one.
Running out of time, Boise, Idaho, capital of that state. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. I've got a couple of questions and a couple of points to bring out. Number one, quite a few years ago, I myself was sexually harassed on 3 different occasions by 3 different top high-ranking people in government. The first thing I did was go to the chain of command, report these people. What disturbs me more than anything else is, why are these women waiting years later? Now, the woman, the Flowers woman, she waited how many years she had a relationship with President Clinton? Then she comes out and reports this. Just before he's running for presidency, his first time around.
No, this is a simple factual point. The reason she raised it was that she was named in the American Spectator Troopergate allegations, and the report implied that she had actually had a sexual relationship with Mr. Clinton, which she denied, and that's why she came out. She'd kept quiet about it until then, and I think that case is reasonable.
Just as Miss Tripp, it seems, would not have got involved in this if she hadn't been called a liar by the president's incredibly incompetent and stupid lawyer, Mr. Bennett. These are people who you're forced now to sort of protect yourself if you're a woman in this ambiance. You're wrong also, madam, I'm afraid to say, about Jennifer Flowers. She was dumped by the governor and disowned so that he could run. And he told her that from then on she wasn't going to exist. And I don't know what your attitude would have been, but she wasn't claiming any harassment.
Coming up very soon, and I asked the Hitchens brothers what they think of this list of performers. Representative Jim Leach, Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, Secretary of Defense William Cohen, Chair of the Federal Reserve Board Alan Greenspan, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury Lawrence Summers, all appearing before the House Committee on Banking and Financial Services. Actually, Jim Leach is in the chair. Fortville, Indiana, next. Go ahead, please.
Brian, the thing that disturbs me about the news media, this is not for the Hitchens brothers, because I got a hunch that they're cousins of Rush Limbaugh. But this is for you. The thing that disturbs me is the fact that when the news media throws out an allegation and then they find out it's not true, they don't report that with the same enthusiasm.
What would you instance as an example of that?
All right, the Arlington Cemetery, selling grave sites for campaign financing. That has been proven to be false.
Has it? Are you so sure?
It was in the Indianapolis News and Star yesterday.
I know that somebody had to be dug up. Doesn't happen every day.
And the other report the other day from the Dallas paper about the Secret Service agent that observed President Clinton and her in some, unsightly scene. That has been proven as false allegation.
No, it has not.
It has actually.
No, you're in error.
You're in error. Was retracted yesterday.
Yeah.
The demon on the dress deal.
We don't know about
The FBI has said that that's absolutely false.
That was reported last night on CBS News.
Right.
Yeah, and it's in the papers this morning.
But with what kind of enthusiasm? American people, they just dribble out these little things that they prove out they're not wrong.
Okay, well, you've just made a couple of errors in your own statement, so perhaps you'd like to retract them. It's not easy. Nobody enjoys doing it. You wouldn't enjoy it either. It's
but Carl, let me ask you this:
if corrections are made,
you've detailed what you see as the retractions and the change in the stories. Why do you think the rest of the world doesn't know what you know?
I don't know why they don't pick it up. It's because the news media comes out with these allegations in such an enthusiastic way, everybody picks the story up. But when the retraction comes along, Very few people pick it up.
Well, how do you know about it then?
How are you so well informed then?
I'm informed, sure, because I'm an avid reader, but the general public is not informed.
How do you know?
Well, because I know from the news coverage.
Yeah, well, there you are then.
All right, now how about the story about Mrs. Lawrence?
What about
she
it?
owned a hotel out in San Diego or wherever.
Coronado, yeah.
And President Clinton stayed there. That proved that he was going to sleep. He'd been sleeping with her, and the story in the news media was that they was going to subpoena her.
Thanks. But I'd say to the two of you, we hear this from both sides, that it's the intensity of the coverage that people often get upset about, like this man. On both sides, we've heard it here. I mean, it used to be a couple weeks ago, why aren't the news media more active in pursuing President Clinton than they have been? Why aren't they mad about it? Why aren't they, you know, why isn't the intensity there? That's the word they often use. What would you say to that, Christopher Hitchens?
Why is there no intensity in the pursuit of Bill Clinton?
I mean, everybody sees this as an intensity problem, depending on which side you're on.
Yeah, well, I think that the press was in the tank with Clinton because he praised my essay on capital punishment in the most recent Vanity Fair, and I'm trying to get, as people say, the full text of that statement before commenting.
Does that bother you?
Yeah, very much.
Why?
Well, I don't look for praise from that quarter, and therefore I had to wince when the gentleman just now said I might be his cousin, because I had this guilty secret. I knew that he'd praised me on the air.
Aiken, South Carolina, we're running out of time. Go ahead, please.
This is my first time getting through. I enjoy the show, and I adore both Hitchens brothers. Mr. Peter has gotten to the heart of a point I've been trying to make for 2 weeks to people I know and to call-in shows, is that this president is very reckless. No one in the American media has looked at some of the ancillary issues, like why were college kids allowed unlimited access to the Oval Office and the West Wing of the White House? This is very, very critical thing. I think perhaps the American press cannot be dispassionate enough to look at some of these reckless activities and then place it in context of how it might be compromising the American positions and our security. And I think perhaps it might take someone as dispassionate as a British journalist.
Thanks. We are running out of time. Mr. Greenspan's in the room. Mr. Peter Hitchens.
I long for the memoirs. When all this is over, when the people who were in there actually come out and say what actually happened, I think we will find out that this White House was immeasurably worse even than we now think it is. And I look forward to reading that. The pity is that the American people can't know now just what a bad government they have.
We have to take one more call, and then we're going to have to go to the hearing. Imperial, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, please.
Yes, there appears to be a little bit of a genteel humor among these two brothers, which is entertaining on this show. I thought possibly I could make a statement in the question that might add a small amount of humor to the situation.
You're going to have to be quick, though.
I thought maybe Mrs. Clinton should change the title of her book to "It Takes a Village to Keep an Eye on My Husband."
Thank you. Mr. Christopher Hitchens, last comment.
My favorite stupidity of the week, and I've heard it a lot, is the number of people who, interviewed as Vox Pop in the street, will say, well, Mr. Kennedy did all that too, but it didn't affect his wonderful job performance. I thought, well, it just shows what a long way we have to go. People should read Seymour Hersh's book and see if they would still say either or both of those things.
Final comment, Peter Hitchens?
My favorite statistic is that 25% of Democrats don't want their daughters to work as interns in the White House anymore. What I want to know is, what about the other 75%?
Thanks, Peter Hitchens. Thanks, Christopher Hitchens. We now go to Capitol Hill and Chairman Jim Leach as he gets ready to bring you a hearing that features Robert Rubin, Secretary of the Treasury, William Cohen, Secretary of Defense, Alan Greenspan,